1, 2. Yes? Now we are hearing us? Okay.
Testing. Yes. Good.
Okay. And we are live? Okay. Cool. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. Sorry, Jeffrey, you are not used to this style of politician.
Oh, come on. Ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome to Cyprus. We are delighted to have you here. A great mind to teach us about politics. And we have a lot of problems here in Cyprus about politics. And I want to start this conversation to ask a bit, who are you? Because we are online as well. We have a lot of people watching us. Maybe some people don't know. So just give a who are you question. I asked you in the past this question.
Hello. I am Jeffrey Sachs, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. I'm a professor at Columbia University. I was thrilled to get an honorary doctorate at your great Frederick University, so I was really thrilled to be coming to Cyprus for this wonderful event. And I'm a UN, a lover of the UN, despite all of the challenges and problems and limits and obvious shortcomings. So I spend most of my time trying to make international cooperation work somehow. And as you know very well, it ain't easy. So this is part of a lifelong challenge.
Okay. Raise our voices. Okay, we can speak a bit louder, don't worry. I will start with a very simple question. Should Cyprus stay in the European Union or leave?
Stay.
And explain why.
Look, Europe is actually important. Europe is important. Europe is important to stay as a union, and the reason, and the reason is nothing's ruined. You try to fix things. That's the most important thing. You could look at the UN and say, well, that's a failure. And it is in many ways, but you try to fix it. The European Union is really flawed. You try to fix it. But I'll tell you one thing. If I were you, and if I were a European country, I would not want to be 27 independent countries with the United States on one side, with Russia, China, India, and other large groups around you. If you're 27, you're in trouble. If you're one, you have a chance. It's not working very well. Nothing's working very well right now, by the way. Look at my country. What a mess. So that doesn't mean that you say, I don't know what you want to say, what the alternative is, but to my mind to say, okay, we end the idea of unity in Europe because it's not working would be a huge mistake. We know Europe, when there isn't unity, there has been endless war. The idea of the European Union is to keep the peace within Europe and to protect Europe in a global context. It remains extremely important in my view. But the general argument that when things don't work, you end them is a wrong argument. When things don't work, you fix them. You diagnose them. You try to figure out what is wrong. And that's what at least I try to do. So I try not to give up. I try to figure out what's right, what's wrong, what's working, what needs to be adjusted.
So the UK did a mistake, in your opinion, leaving the European Union?
Yeah, I thought, as I told my wife, who's here someplace,
we love Sonia. Let's give it up. Yeah. By the way, guys, I met his wife, and this is what we say. Behind a great man, there is always a smart, powerful woman. She's
Smarter.
Amazing. Smarter.
So, as I was about to say, Sonia asked me the night before the Brexit vote, just so you know the authority with which I speak. And she said, what's going to happen? And I said, of course they're going to vote down Brexit. No way. So don't listen to me. Prediction is pretty tough, and I got that one wrong and many other things wrong. But if you ask me what should have been the vote should have been to stay in the Union. Britain is kind of disappearing before our eyes into a massive incompetency, economic decline. They can't keep the NHS working. It's a mess. So Britain did itself no favor by Brexit. And now, by the way, Starmer, who I don't much like, I have to tell you.
Me as well.
But in any event, he's trying to get back to Europe in countless ways right now, because Britain is seeing also on the security issues and so forth, we can't be separate. And so even in recent days, you see that Brexit put Britain itself into a terrible trap, and they made a mistake. It's going to take 20 years probably, and they'll reverse it.
So it's better to be in the European Union, but we are a very small country, one of the smallest in the European Union. So we don't have so much power to change stuff in the European Union. So we have, there is 720 members in the European Parliament. We have 6. And also our president, out of the 27 with this small population, don't have so much to say. But we have some power. What we should be doing with our power and how we should be using our power in the European Union as a small country.
Maybe I'll step back and say just a word about the United States, which is also in its own kind of crisis right now, and related to what you've asked me, because obviously we have a kind of broken constitution also, but actually we have at least a government that has functioned most of the time over the last couple hundred years. And the history of the United States is relevant for Europe in a way that I think is very important. And so if you give me just a minute to explain why. Like Cyprus, Britain, the United States, of course, was a British colony. And it got pretty sick and tired of being a British colony or British colonies by the mid-1770s. And in 1776, 13 independent colonies got together, drafted a Declaration of Independence with the great phrasing of Thomas Jefferson, and declared their independence. And the French came to the rescue of these 13 colonies, and the French basically defeated the British in 1778, 79, and Britain said, okay, we're done with this in 1781, and went home. And when Britain went home, there were 13 separate countries, not a United States of America, but 13 separate countries, something like 27 European countries. They were a loose confederation, something like the Treaty of Lisbon, by the way, not more. There was no foreign policy, there was no central government, there was no central tax authority, there was no ability to do anything really as a group other than by unanimity. And that was called the Articles of Confederation. It looks not so far from the European Union model, in fact. And in the 1780s, it didn't work. Not surprisingly, because now there were 13 independent countries. They couldn't agree on anything. They couldn't raise taxes to pay off the debts from the war that had just taken place. The Spanish were pushing them hard and trying to block them in the port at New Orleans. The British were pushing hard against these new tiny independent states and so forth. And 6 years after independence, they got together and said, this is not working. Actually, one really clever guy wangled the rest of them to a meeting in Philadelphia. And it would be like somebody in Europe saying, we need to rethink the Treaty of Lisbon. So James Madison, who was a Virginia politician and landowner, got the rest to send delegates to Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. And they kind of took off from there and wrote a constitution to create a real federal government. And interestingly, they cheated a little bit, not surprisingly, as politicians need to do, because under the Articles of Confederation, you could only amend the Articles of Confederation if you had unanimity. All 13 would have to agree. But this convention was a revolutionary convention. So they said if 9 out of the 13 agree, it applies. In other words, they changed the rules midway. They drafted the Constitution. Eventually, all 13 ratified it. Even the tiniest ones like Rhode Island, the Cyprus of North America, if you want to put it that way, because it was a tiny colony compared to some of the bigger colonies. And they were worried. Why should we have a federal government? My God, we're so tiny. But they were given certain prerogatives. For example, 2 senators, just like the 2 senators of Virginia, just like the 2 senators of Pennsylvania. In the lower house, it was by proportional size of population. But in the upper house, as it is till today, every state, big or small, gets 2 votes. But the point for me that's relevant is these independent countries in 1787 figured out something interesting. Like Europe, we better give up some of our sovereignty so that we can negotiate with the Spanish, we can face the British, we can collect taxes inside, we can build infrastructure. They had the idea, if we're 13, it isn't going to work. And they use the expression e pluribus unum. Out of many comes one. And they made a federal government for the first time. Pretty clever. By the way, the Constitution's not working very well right now. That's another very interesting matter because systems get corrupted over time. So the U.S. government's a very corrupt system now. I mean money. Campaign contributions and lobbying and so forth. So it's broken in some ways. But still, the idea that you think, what do we need for our time? How do we get organized? How do we set the rules that really make sense is good political thinking. And you understand that political institutions need to change over time. I'm in favor of a UN convention like the Philadelphia Convention. So in 1787, 13 independent countries said we better create an effective government. I want the 193 UN member states to do the same thing because we have a charter from 1945 which defines how the UN works, and it's not working right now. It's not keeping the peace. It's not playing its effective role. It's broke. It has no money. It's a little bit like the Articles of Confederation. When you come to Europe, Europe isn't working either in a very effective way. Now, we have a lot to talk about on that because views will differ on that. But my view is you need more Europe, not less Europe. This is very paradoxical for people. If it's not working, why do you want more, you idiot? If it's not working, you should have less. Okay, perfectly understandable. I don't want more for the sake of more. I want more because you need something more, in my opinion. The reason things don't function in part is that when everything is unanimity of 27, it doesn't work. When the budget at the union level is 1% of the gross domestic product of Europe, but the budget at the national level is 40%. So there's just one tiny bit at the union level and 40% at the national level. To my mind, that's a bit doomed to fail. My view is that Europe has fallen behind technologically, which is really surprising because it's 27. Europe has all the technology, all the leaders, all the institutions, all the universities, all the scientists that you need. But the United States has a continental market. China has a continental market. When we look for IT or AI, we got the whole market. What Europe has, as you know, it's the cliche, but you don't have the market, you've got regulation. Okay, so you don't have any AI champions right now. You don't have any electric vehicle champions right now. This was a huge mistake of the German auto industry that's hurting all of Europe right now. Europe adopted a European Green Deal. What is the European plan to implement the Green Deal? There isn't one. The Green Deal is goals that then went to 27 independent countries. No overall plan. If I say to a leading business in Europe, a big company, what's the infrastructure plan? They laugh at me. Jeff, don't you know anything? Of course there's no European plan. You can't even decide to connect the grids together properly except in a 10-year convulsion that is very difficult politically. Because really it's not a union that's as effective as it needs to be, in my opinion. So more of a bad thing is not a better thing. This is true. But what I'm saying is more effective in a world of giants where you have Russia on one side, you have the U.S. on the other side. And by the way, the U.S. is more likely to invade the EU than Russia is. Because Russia has denied that it's going to do it, but the United States has said repeatedly it's going to do it. I'm not joking. When the United States, our president says Greenland is going to be part of the United States, don't think it's a joke. It's incredibly vulgar, but it's not a joke. So you have real issues, actually. And that, from my mind, requires a kind of unity to think through the technology, the infrastructure, the role of AI in society, which is quite fundamental. Why is the world's leading lithography chip manufacturer, which of course is the Dutch company ASML, why is it governed by the United States, not by Europe? Pretty amazing. Who tells ASML what to do? You think the Netherlands government does? No. You think Brussels does? No. Of course it's the United States of America. That's a mistake. And so this, to my mind, is why you need more unity. By the way, you can disagree, but I'm talking right now.
It's okay. It's okay.
No, I know. I'm just saying it's fine.
Okay, so just to summarize what you said basically some ideas that we need less regulation, we need to have diplomacy, we need to be careful from United States. So the question was what our politicians should be doing. So our politicians, to summarize your answer, should be working towards what you describe.
Yes.
Even if we're small, even if we don't have that much impact, we need to be working towards this, what you describe.
Of course, what Cypriot politicians need to do, first of all, is look after Cyprus. This is obvious. But look after Cyprus in a context of Europe and in a context of the world. And there's one other concept that I find very, very useful. and it's actually embodied in the European idea. It came from the Catholic Church originally, but it's called subsidiarity. And the idea of subsidiarity is, let's get real. We need governments at all levels. We need a global government, that's the UN. We need a regional government, that's the European Union. We need a national government, that is the government of Cyprus. We need a local government, that is the Nicosia City Hall where we are right now. You have governments at all levels. The idea of subsidiarity is put the governance at the lowest level you can, where that level of government can actually do what it needs to do. So we don't want the UN running the local school system. We want the local government running the local school system, or running the local clinic, or keeping the potholes cleared up on the city streets, or making the sidewalks passable, or making the parks beautiful. That's not the job of the UN. On the other hand, the city of Nicosia cannot solve the global climate crisis. It's impossible. If you made your
You
own,
underestimate Nicosia.
I don't want to estimate you at all. And I will tell you one thing. If the weather that we had was what we create just over our own heads, the climate crisis would be solved. Each place would warm to the extent that they want to warm. They would stop. They would take care. You would control your own climate. If it was getting too dry, you would turn the dials. Maybe we should have some more solar power, a little bit less gas power, and so forth. The problem is, as you know, the climate is driven by the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And when you put some CO2 into the atmosphere by driving your car that is a petrol engine, burning the petrol, putting the CO2 up, in 30 days, that CO2 can be anywhere in the atmosphere. The scientists call it uniform mixing. So the atmosphere doesn't care where the CO2 comes from. It all gets mixed to create the global climate. That means we cannot solve the global climate crisis except with global government, dare I say. That's a term that's evil in the United States context. Global government, Mr. Sachs? Are you a globalist? Of course, I'm not a globalist in this awful sense that people think. I don't want the UN telling you what to do, how to live, what to eat, and so forth. But when it comes to saving the Earth's climate, I want a global, effective arrangement.
And we might need this with AI as well.
And we're going to need this. We need it with nuclear weapons, ladies and gentlemen. We need it with all powerful technologies. I'll tell you a sad truth, also a little surprising. And I have to admit, what I'm about to tell you is only 99% sure. But my view, based on very extensive work over the last 4.5 years, is that COVID came from the University of North Carolina, which is the leading researcher on beta coronaviruses, working with the U.S. government on a set of grant proposals that identified putting in the viral change that created SARS-CoV-2. It's a grim truth. It's ugly. It's been hidden from view. The reason I mention it in this context is we don't have any global governance that is effective right now to control the manipulation of dangerous pathogens like the manipulation that created the pandemic. And when it happened, and officially it took 7 million deaths, but probably if you count all of the deaths associated with COVID. It was probably closer to 20 million deaths. Even when that happens, it's never properly investigated. It's covered up. It's hidden from view.
This is a big claim. It's the first time that
Yes.
I hear it. Can you tell us a bit more about this? How and why? And
Yeah, and I didn't want to divert except to say we need global government to keep us alive. Don't underestimate how much things can get screwed up by dangerous technologies that are not under proper control. Just a word about this because, honestly, I've spent I don't know how much time over the last 4.5 years with learning from others because I'm not a scientist. I'm a pretty assiduous researcher, but I depend on what the scientists have helped me to understand. But basically, COVID is caused by a virus. The virus is called SARS-CoV-2. SARS was the original disease, and SARS-CoV-2 is the scientific name of the virus that causes COVID-19 disease. When you look at the virus, there's something very odd about it. For two major reasons, it looks like it's manipulated in the laboratory. Of course, that's not absolutely ironclad to prove. Ironclad would be to get the emails and the lab experiments and the lab notebooks and so forth, which we don't have because they remain hidden from view. But you can tell from the genetic signature a lot. And there are two main parts of the virus that show, my God, someone was tampering with this kind of virus. One of them is 4 amino acids. And for those of you who remember your biochemistry, that means 12 nucleotides. Each 3 codes for 1 amino acid. There are 4 amino acids that are inserted in this virus that don't appear anywhere else in nature in this family of viruses, which is a bat family. And in the research proposals for many years, scientists at University of North Carolina and some other places had the idea of putting in that sequence to do certain experiments because they knew that if that sequence is put in, it's called a furin cleavage site, it makes the virus most likely much more transmissible and dangerous to people. So they were studying that. It was never seen in nature, but the idea was, maybe if we put it in, it becomes very dangerous. And you can find the documents explaining that's the experiment we want to do. Now, there's a lot more that can be said, but the point is, because of people who leaked information, because of Freedom of Information Act, because of people who talked, we now have a very good record of what most likely happened. Not for sure, but most likely. And what most likely happened is that our government, the U.S. government, funded research to put this furin cleavage site into this virus with the strange idea, ladies and gentlemen, of creating a vaccine for bats. What they wanted to do was to have something that could be put into the air in caves in Southeast Asia that the bats would inhale and then make the bats immune to new infections by these beta coronaviruses. It sounds wild, and it is. But the idea was that American soldiers fight in Southeast Asia, and they could get sick from these viruses transmitted by the bats. So we should create vaccines against bats. Honestly, only the U.S. Department of Defense could come up with this. Honestly, I'm telling you. But it's not atypical. It's really how the government of the United States operates. So they did these experiments, most likely, again, I'm putting it at 99%. And then they tested it on the bats that the U.S. has in captivity in the government laboratory in Montana. And the virus worked. It was transmitted in the bats. But there was only one problem, ladies and gentlemen. The kind of bat that the U.S. has in captivity isn't the kind of bat in Southeast Asia. In Montana, they're called Egyptian fruit bats. But the bats in Southeast Asia are called horseshoe bats, or Rhinophilus sinicus bats in particular in Yunnan province, China. Who has those bats? Who do you think has those bats in captivity? China. The Wuhan Institute of Virology. So how about taking this test virus and testing it in the bats in Wuhan Institute of Virology? You just send it by mail. Oops, what happened? Oh, did I stick myself? Did I breathe something I shouldn't have breathed? There was a lab accident in Wuhan. And the next thing we know, several years later, 20 million dead.
So you think the United States did it to harm China?
No. The United States did it most likely for the very reason it says in a proposal you can find online, by the way, if you're really interested in this. It's called the Diffuse Proposal, DEFUSE, submitted to something called DARPA, which is the Defense Department Advanced Research Program. And you can find it online, and it explains what did they want to do. They wanted to make it safe for American fighters in Southeast Asia, not by harming China, but by protecting bats from infection. Okay, honestly, pretty weird. But when you're rich, you can do a lot of weird things. And that's one of the weird things the United States did. And incidentally, when the virus appeared, the scientists said, oh shit, this looks not natural. Something bad probably happened. And they said that on February 1st, 2020, in a private phone call of the top scientists that was then released by a Freedom of Information Act. And you know what? 4 days later, those same scientists wrote the first draft of a paper saying, this came from nature. That's called a cover-up. So this was the next step of this. You know, we got diverted.
So out of stupidity is the answer. Out of stupidity this happened.
Out of
stupidity this happened.
Oh my God, the world's ruled by stupidity.
Okay. So
but by the way, in a very fascinating way, the science is genius, brilliant. The scientist who most likely made this is the world's greatest scientist on beta coronaviruses. He's a genius. You know what he can do? You know that a virus is a sequence of DNA or RNA material. So it's like letters, A, G, C, C, and so forth. 30,000 of those base pairs. This guy is so smart, he figured out if you give him the list of 30,000 letters, he'll turn the letters into a live virus. That's genius. So in this sense, the world is ruled by genius, except not genius in what you do with this genius, idiocy with what you do with it. And the same is true with nuclear weapons, by the way. To come up with the nuclear armaments required the greatest scientific genius of our time. The Los Alamos invention of the atomic bomb was led by 12 Maine, but hundreds of the leading physicists in the world. Brilliant, complete genius. But then it went to the U.S. Army. A little different. To a general who said, well, why don't we bomb the Soviets? Because that's a different matter. That's not genius. And so we have a big problem in this world. The science is way ahead of us, way ahead of our governance. The AI is genius. And it took basically from the 1950s till now, it took about 70 years to bring about where we are right now in so many breakthroughs of science. But who's governing this stuff? Donald J. Trump. Good luck. That's our problem.
I know you started saying about this COVID stuff because you are afraid to talk about the Cyprus problem. What? Okay, 51 years ago, Turkey invaded Cyprus, and we have a big problem here in Cyprus. It's been a lot of time since we're trying to solve this. So how do we move forward? How do we solve this? Do you think it's possible?
Oh, that I can answer easily. Yes, it's possible. It's possible because of a simple fact. Conflicts are lose-lose propositions. Wars are not win-lose propositions. They're lose-lose propositions. When this island is divided, the Turkish Cypriots lose, the Greek Cypriots lose, Turkey loses, Europe loses, the world loses. Everybody loses. There's nothing won by having a wall in between two populations. That's a losing situation. So when you have a situation that is lose-lose, it is true that there can be a win-win. What is hard in life is win-lose situations, when somebody's taking something from somebody else. That's hard. And when you're in direct conflict over a resource, that can create, obviously, generally, I should put it actually a little bit more carefully. Most conflicts over resources actually are lose-lose because both sides clash, both sides lose, nobody wins out of the conflict. And that, I think, most accurately reflects the situation here, and it reflects the situation in Ukraine, and it reflects the situation in most places in the world. We don't get to the win-win outcomes for actually lots of obviously very complicated reasons, because of fundamental differences of understanding of the situation, because of beliefs by one side that they can win, defeat the other side, that usually is a absolutely erroneous idea, but arrogance plays a huge role in the failure to reach solutions. Politicians often stand in the way because sometimes it's the case that the populations on both sides of a conflict say we want this to end, but a particular politician or small clique is so invested in the fighting that they know that their lives or their careers or their politics comes to an end if they go along with the interests of their own public. I believe that, and this is a complicated subject, we can talk about it, and what I'm going to say will annoy many people probably, but I think Zelensky is like that, by the way, because I believe that the big interest of the Ukrainian people and the big desire of the Ukrainian people is to end this war now. But, yeah, it would be the end of Zelensky's time as president, certainly, if that were the case. And so I believe that this becomes a very personalized issue. One of the reasons why an area where I agree with Trump, most of the time I don't, but an area where I do agree with him is what he's doing to try to end the war in Ukraine is very simple for him. He says, this isn't my war, this is Biden's war. I don't want to have to live with that burden around my neck. And Biden would not change his position no matter how much the facts on the ground proved all his suppositions wrong, because these individual politicians don't like to change even when the broad publics want something different. So you asked me the question, is there a solution? I would define a solution as being an outcome that is better for both sides than the current outcome. Does that exist? I'm sure that it exists, because everyone's paying a price right now. No doubt, both sides are paying a price right now compared to what could be. So that means, in my opinion, that there is a solution. If I knew more, I would tell you exactly what it is. But I would tell you that, in principle, in most conflicts in the world, they are driven by either completely erroneous beliefs, so beliefs of grandeur or beliefs of victory that are unjustified, or they're driven by politicians that don't represent the interests of the populations that ostensibly they are leading. And this, I think, is a pretty much true of conflicts throughout the ages.
I'm going to ask you a bit more. I'm not satisfied with your answer.
Okay, we're just getting started.
Yes. I'm going to bring a lot more pragmatic perspective to the conversation. For example, I'm a member of the European Parliament. We have rules, regulations, and all this stuff that we vote. So my role is to put, or Cyprus' role is to put pressure on Turkey with sanctions, with all this stuff. Like, how we should try to put pressure on Turkey to solve this? Should we try to work with Turkey in stuff in order to solve this? What should be our stand, kind of? It's a tough position to be.
No, I generally believe in one basic point, that if you are stuck in a situation where you can envision a win for both sides compared to the status quo, that the way out of that is some kind of negotiation or dialogue, not pressure. As a general matter, it's a basic economic idea. We call it Pareto improvement, from an Italian sociologist at the beginning of the 20th century named Vilfredo Pareto. The idea of a Pareto improvement is to move from the status quo to a situation that is better for both. So that's what I would search for. I would search for a movement from the current frozen conflict to something that is better for both sides. Then I'd ask the question, well, why not? What stops this? What is it that is holding this back? Is this some politicians on both sides or on one side? Is this Turkey on one side? Is this some other set of interests? But if it's a win-win proposition, why can't we get there? If you say, no, look, this is unfair, this has really hurt us, we don't accept any of this, so we're looking for a win-lose. We win, the other side loses because they're unfair. I don't know how to help. That's your business. But if you believe, as I would, that there's a way to make a win-win, then there are a lot of principles of how to move from the status quo to a win-win. Trump, by the way, thinks that the way you do it is that you punch your adversary in the nose first. You threaten them with more sanctions. You say, if we don't agree in a week, I'm going to destroy you. And then you sit down to talk. Maybe that's how you do it in New York real estate. I don't believe that that's the right way to do such a thing. I believe that you can have two different ways to do this. One is that you find a mediator, and you have someone help to mediate. And you go back and forth, and the mediator comes to your side and says, so what is it? And then they go to the other side and go back and forth. And if they're good mediators, they say, I'm beginning to discern a win-win. Here's some ideas. And you see whether you can move forward. The other way is to negotiate directly. I generally believe in negotiation directly. To my mind, negotiation is low cost and often surprisingly high outcomes. And one of the reasons is that, again, you'll say I'm simple-minded, maybe I am, but when you negotiate, if you treat the other side with respect, that goes a huge way, actually, in reaching an agreement. You may not like them, but if you're a good negotiator, you will treat them with respect, with dignity, you'll listen, and maybe actually really listen and learn because, oh, I didn't know that, or that's an interesting way of thinking about it. I never thought about the problem in those terms. And that, even experimentally, ladies and gentlemen, shows huge results. In my field, we study game theory. That is strategic interaction. And one of the principles of game theory is there are certain kinds of games where the outcome is likely to be lose-lose and where you can get to an improved situation compared to the outcome. One of these famous games, which some students may have studied, is called the prisoner's dilemma. And you end up in a lose-lose, but you could actually, therefore, have a Pareto improvement, a win-win compared to the status quo. And then we've tested, not we, the economics profession for 50 years. How do you get to that win-win? And you know what the answer is, surprisingly? The simplest way to do it is to let the two players talk with each other, even if it's not binding. Just discussion says, oh, yeah, we could get to the win-win. Let's do it. Okay. And then even though one could cheat on the way, they actually 90% of the time arrive at the win-win together. So this is one of my gripes about Europe and Russia right now. I'm ducking your question again because I know less about it. But when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia war, how many times has President Costa, the head of the European Council, met with President Putin? That would be 0. How many times has your High Representative Vice President, Kaja Kallas, met with her counterpart, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov? That would be 0. How can you have peace? How can you expect to reach an agreement if you're not even talking with the other side? You can't. All that happens right now is from Brussels is lightning bolts, anti-Russia, Russophobic lightning bolts. They're going to invade Europe. They're going to destroy Europe. They're going to be in Paris. We need $800 billion of armaments. My advice to you is before you spend $800 billion on armaments, make a phone call first. So I don't know the situation here in detail, and I know there's a lot of pain, and I know there's a lot of history and a lot of angst. Your situation does fulfill one theorem of mine, though, I have to tell you, and that is all problems in the world go back to the British. Okay? That's true in Gaza, that's true in China, that's true in Pakistan, India, that's true throughout the Middle East, that's true here. The British made the biggest mess in this world because they were the most powerful empire for 200 years. And they left behind conflicts everywhere. And they got a lot of nerve as far as I'm concerned, because even today, Starmer acts like an imperialist. He doesn't have anything to back it up, really, although he's got a few nuclear weapons that could destroy the world. But the rest is a bunch of imperial nostalgia, let's say. Grand empire wannabe. But in any event, you fit that mold. All British problems are tough ones also. They were really cynical, and so they tied every place up in knots. You know, the disaster taking place in Palestine right now, one of the reasons is that between 1915 and 1917, the British promised the same territory to 3 different groups. So first, in the McMahon communications, the British promised it to the Arabs. You fight with us against the Turks, it's yours. Then they negotiated the Sykes-Picot Treaty to say to the French, it's yours. Then in the Balfour Declaration in 1917, they said it's a Jewish homeland. This is British. Three times of land that wasn't even theirs. So this is where the problems originate. Now you need to disentangle all of this. But by the way, the history of this island is probably about the most complicated history in the whole world. I'm not kidding you. I don't know of another place where every single empire has been here. From the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, Byzantine, the Umayyads, the Ottomans, the French, the British. And why? Because this island is so beautiful, so strategically located, so productive. Everyone wants it. I want it. You know, that's why I'm here.
Thank you for promoting Cyprus. We love Cyprus. Cyprus it is amazing, actually. I want to summarize to conclude this conversation about the Cyprus problem. From your sayings, also I talked also with Alexander Mercouris. He's another, like you, geostrategic, geopolitics thinker. And he said, you always try in Cyprus to have the European Union, the United States, everyone to help you solve the Cyprus problem. And everyone comes with their agenda. They want not to solve the Cyprus problem. They want to take advantage of you to get something else. So the best thing that you should do, he said to me, is to take your destiny to your own hands. And this is kind of what you are saying as well. Kind of go and talk, force this ourselves to talk. This is your understanding as well, kind of the conclusion?
Yeah, again, I apologize, and I don't want to oversimplify. Really, I don't. But there should be discussions between Cyprus and Turkey. There should be discussions between Greek part of Cyprus and the Turkish part of Cyprus, as it is right now. There should probably be discussions also with Greece and Turkey and Cyprus, all parts together. There should be discussions right now. The more that, the thing that I don't like, because I don't think it works, to say we need maximum pressure on Turkey right now. I think there should be dialogue right now. There should be analysis. It's not in Turkey's interest to have a divided Cyprus. It isn't. It really isn't at the core. It's
Can
not.
you explain this why? And in your explanation, talk a bit about the Turkey's role inside this geopolitical system of the world.
Look, if there was a Cyprus without the walls, Turkey would be a big beneficiary. There are several 100,000 Turkish Cypriots. They have relations with the Republic of Turkey. Turkey would do a lot of business and a lot of trade. It would ease a lot of relations. It would ease a lot of difficulties. Tourism would expand markedly. There would be many, many benefits, issues about the energy system in the Eastern Mediterranean, cooperation on the climate challenges in the Eastern Mediterranean. Everything would be a lot easier. There would be more prosperity, there would be more tourism, there would be more business, there would be more solutions to regional problems. People would be happier on both sides of the current divide. So, to my mind, that's why I say this is a win-win situation. When I see a win-win situation, I like to talk to the other side. Of course, I've spoken at length with Ukrainian officials, but I've spent a very large amount of time speaking with the Russian officials about this. On that crisis, they have real points to make. We don't even want to hear them. Our newspapers don't report them. Everything is unprovoked violence coming from one side. This is false.
And we ban even the media.
And when you go to talk, you learn something about this. So, again, I apologize for sounding simplistic, but what I would do is say, look, here's how everyone can be made better off. And I would speak to the counterparts in Turkey and say, well, what about it? What's wrong with that? And they may give you an answer, well, we don't trust this or we don't trust that. And then you say, oh, but that can be solved in the following way. Yeah, but what about that? Oh, but no, you don't understand. We could do this. Oh, that's what dialogue is, honestly. Dialogue is trying to figure out what's on your mind. You know, it could be, oh, it's a complete clash. There's nothing to talk about. Life almost is never like that, by the way, except among extremists. For most people, life isn't like that. For most people, life is, we could actually move forward in a better way that would make me happier, would probably make you happier as well. Again, my experience, and it is extensive, is sometimes what I'm saying, you fall flat on your face and you fail terribly. So no guarantees in life that you get to the win-win, definitely not. But sometimes it surprises you what can happen, but it won't happen if both sides are spitting hate in both sides or not even talking to each other. So that's why I think my real recommendation is not a list of do this, do this, do this. It is engage, not in threats, but engage in diplomacy and directly be involved. This is your future. Be involved with Turkey, be involved with others in the region, but try to work out how things can work better.
When there is club, it's like people listening. So they like what they're hearing and they are engaged. So it's very cool. So let's talk a bit of what you are very comfortable talking about, which the U.S. president and leadership, they decided, they signed a deal, mineral deal with Ukraine. And immediately after they signed it, they walked away from the conversation kind of in Ukraine. What's your thoughts on this?
Let me ask you a question, ladies and gentlemen. Did you read that we signed an agreement? Yeah. Did you read the agreement? No. Okay. How weird is this the two sides sign an agreement, and then it's not shown to anybody. And the newspapers are so stupid or corrupt or in the hands of the government that they don't even point out that they don't see it. I can't believe it. It's like when you read the New York Times, it's like having your thumb in your mouth, like being a 3-year-old. They report this thing. They don't say, we don't have the document. The government's keeping it hidden. Why is it keeping it hidden? Aren't there any reporters left in this world? I don't get it. Honestly, we don't even know what is in this document. So if you ask me about it, the first thing I would say is, you have this crucial agreement and it's secret? That's not acceptable, period. Period. Second, my guess is it's a bunch of nonsense, is my guess. I doubt that anyone signed away anything, frankly. I don't know. But if I had to guess, it's a bunch of nonsense that in 2 years you'll never hear of again. Because there's so much baloney. I can't use the words I really want to use. There is so much baloney. Would I agree that we're entering an age of truth? I don't know. You know, we're entering an age.
My friend.
Wait a minute.
My
you
friend,
ask a question.
We are going to have time for everyone questions. Because you are loud doesn't mean.
I believe that we're entering a period in which it's easier to make deep fakes of every kind possible, and that we are not equipped, even in our own psychologies, to understand. So many things are faked right now. There are clips of me. It wasn't a fake. I gave a speech. They wanted to show it to other languages. So I speak perfect Mandarin in this tape. And then I speak perfect Italian. Then I speak perfect French, perfect Spanish. And the mouth is perfect, by the way. You'd never know that this is the world we're going to get in. And they're going to do malicious, very dangerous things where we're not going to know what's true and what isn't true. And I know, by the way, you know, many people, there's many websites with my name as the website that I have nothing to do with. I don't actually pay attention to it, I have to tell you, because I don't have time. I don't even understand how it works in the sense of who would I talk to at Twitter or not Twitter, whatever it is, X. What would I do? I don't even know. But they have my name on it. And this is all over the place. So are we really uncovering things? I don't know. What I do know, and I can tell you, my government works systematically by lies, nonstop throughout my whole lifetime. And I see it up until today. And it works systematically by secrecy, like an agreement between two governments that's supposed to be strategic, and we don't even know what's in it, for heaven's sake.
No, my friend.
Wait. I just want to hear one sentence. Sorry. No. It's okay. Yeah, tell me.
It's okay. If Jeffrey Sachs said it's okay, it is okay.
Tell me.
But because the people don't hear him, take him a microphone.
He's not a politician, he's a businessman, which is now, like I said, we've entered a new age. He's not speaking to every politician. He's speaking only to people.
Okay. I got it. So the argument is...
Say it to the people online.
Yeah, the argument is of the gentleman. The argument of the gentleman is that Donald Trump is not a politician, so Donald Trump's not a politician, so he's speaking truly not like a politician. I can tell you, it's not so good, unfortunately. It's not so good. No, that's not the point. That's not the point. The point is the government is filled with lies every day. Donald Trump's government. I don't like that they knocked on the door of one of my students and dragged him out of his room in the middle of the night. And he's been in detention for weeks in Louisiana without a judicial warrant because the U.S. government claimed that he's a threat to U.S. foreign policy. He's my student and he's a permanent resident. He happens to believe that the Palestinian cause is just. So do I. That's not a reason to drag a student out of his dorm room in the middle of the night with his 8-month pregnant wife and to lock him up for recent weeks. That's a lie. That's not a truth. The administration claimed that my university, Columbia University, is an anti-Semitic institution. That's absurd. I'm a Jewish professor there, and so is a lot of the faculty and a lot of the students. There's nothing anti-Semitic about protesting what Israel is doing, by the way, by students. That's not about anti-Semitism. That is about politics of a state. It's not about a religion. It's about what I regard as a massacre going on in Gaza. Okay, so we're falsely charged on these things. And the tariffs, this is also wrong. Donald Trump declared an emergency of a trade deficit, an emergency. Excuse me, the trade deficit has been a deficit for 20 years. That's not an emergency, that's a matter of public policy. That doesn't give you, one person, the right to overturn the trade system. That's a lie to call it an emergency. That's an abuse of power. So I don't see the U.S. government behaving responsibly. And by the way, I haven't liked any of our recent presidents. Our politics are broken. I called Joe Biden the worst foreign policy president that we had in our modern history. And Donald Trump's doing a better job than he. Okay, that's true, because he's trying to end the war in Ukraine. I don't like the fact that he's given Bibi Netanyahu pretty much a free hand in Gaza. That's disgusting to me. So I don't give a blank check to anybody. I don't consider any politician above criticism. And I don't believe most of what the U.S. government says to me day by day, no matter who it is, because we have an institution that lies and that is corrupt. So that's my problem.
Okay, I just want to admit something and also put my last question, and then we're going to open it for the audience too. It's very beautiful for me. I'm very grateful because a lot of the stuff that I'm voting, a lot of the stuff that I read the books of you and Messheimer, I saw a lot, 10,000 hours of your talks and all this stuff combined with So this is where my learning came from since 1 year that I became a politician. And it's very beautiful to me that you are here with all the people, probably a lot of the people that voted for me, and we are doing this. This is very, very beautiful. And my question is, because I'm 25 years old, my father is a priest, and I'm kind of a kid walking into this politics, and I believe that I have a moral compass. I don't lie. I always say the truth. I try to be useful to society. And a lot of the times, it's difficult to be a moral politician because kind of the word works as you describe it. It's kind of the biggest, you are trying to get more power in order to survive in this world. So a lot of the times, to get more power, you need to do some stuff to take advantage of others, so how do you become moral politician in this world that we are living?
That is a very old question, and the one that asked it most accurately first was Platon. Plato asked it in the Republic. So I thank the Greek world for that, because Plato's question precisely was, how do you have moral politics? That's the subject of the dialogue, the Republic. Okay, he gave an answer The answer was you raise the leaders from birth and you raise philosopher kings. And that's the way you do it. And they own nothing, and they're trained in all of the right skills in philosophy, in gymnastics, in the arts, in music, in other fields, and they are then raised with the right philosophical outlook. That was Plato's idea. He had a student who I really like.
Socrates!
No, Aristotle.
Oh, oops.
He had a teacher, Socrates,
Okay,
but
yeah.
he had a student, Aristotle. And Aristotle is my favorite philosopher of all in the world, because Aristotle invented almost everything, but he wrote the first book of scientific ethics, if I could say that, called the Nicomachean Ethics. And it's not only the first book of ethics, it's the greatest book ever written. Now, the Analects of Confucius are wonderful for their wisdom also, but in terms of the idea of a rigorous argument of rational basis of ethics, I would put Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics as the number one. Now, in the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle tried to teach us some basic ideas. And one of the most important ideas was to find the middle ground between deficiency and excess in our behavior. So he tried to teach what the Greeks called, I don't know if you would use the term today, but ancient Greek term for it is arete, excellence. But we translate in philosophy, at least, arete as virtue. So it's both virtue and excellence. And what it means is an excellence of the soul. And that's what he was trying to propound. And he had a very good idea, which is how to train, how to cultivate yourself for arete. And there were several dimensions of that, but the most important, like we were talking about on peacemaking, is, and I'm going to mangle the pronunciation again, but phronesis. Phronesis is practical wisdom. So phronesis is judge the practical situation and apply your excellence to the practical situation, whether the practical situation is Palestine or the practical situation is Ukraine. Have practical wisdom to try to do the right thing. Now, the reason I say all of this is that the Nicomachean Ethics is about our personal ethics, how to behave, how to be a better person. Chapter 8 is about how to have friends, by the way. Very wonderful. At the end of chapter 10, the last words are, now we turn to politics. Because he said politics is a chapter of ethics. It's how we behave in the polis collectively. Now, this is a very important idea. It's the most important idea of politics. It's the Greek idea of politics, invented by Greece. Rarely practiced in this world, but invented by Greece. And it is that politics is the application of moral excellence to collective action. That's what politics is. And the idea is that if we were 2,400 years ago, we'd be standing on the Areopagus, just beneath the Parthenon, and we would hold up our cards or we would be debating, but we would be out there to apply our collective excellence. And that's what politics should be. Machiavelli had a completely different idea. Machiavelli is raison d'etat, and you, the prince, are the state. And so you can lie, you can cheat, because power is your end. If not your end, it's close enough to your telos. And so we dropped the idea of ethics in politics somewhere along the way. Yet the core of politics is ethics for our collective lives together. So the idea that I want to be an ethical politician is a completely Greek idea. You're just repeating Aristotle, which is not a bad thing to do, honestly. And this is what we should try to propound. And I'll tell you something quite interesting, because probably most of you are Greek Orthodox. I'm Jewish, but I happen to sit as an academician in the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences of the Roman Catholic Church. And that's an incredible institution because it's trying to inform the Pope about modern social science, or there's a scientific unit also because the Pope wants the best information and feedback and up-to-date knowledge. But within that is a social teaching of the Catholic Church. And the modern Catholic social teachings were started by a pope in 1891 named Pope Leo XIII, because it was the new age of industrialization, and he said, what is moral in our new age? So he wrote a papal encyclical in 1891. But who was his favorite philosopher? St. Thomas Aquinas, who was a professor at University of Paris in the 13th century. And who was Aquinas' favorite philosopher by far? In fact, he called him the philosopher. That was Aristotle. So when the Pope speaks about the Catholic social teachings, he's to a great extent speaking Aristotle. And when the Pope teaches about statecraft, how states should relate to each other, how government should relate, it's Aristotelian. It's amazing. So you should be very proud, first of all, because this is a tradition that goes 2,350 years, nothing less than that. And it is the greatest philosophical tradition. And the idea is that politics is ethics. The fact that you have to ask the question is how far we have strayed from the most basic knowledge in this world, that of course politics is not just about power games. Politics is about how we live together collectively in a way that makes sense. So we should be applying phronesis. We should be applying justice. We should be applying temperance. We should be applying bravery or fortitude, Andrea in the ancient Greek.
Andrea.
I never knew how to pronounce any of it, but I know how to read it. And the idea is these are the excellences that we need for our world today. So this is a very, very good idea. In my view, the whole world depends on this Greek virtue ethics to come back to life, to be applied. And so your question turns into an answer. I'm a politician, therefore I'm an ethicist. I can't be a politician without being an ethicist, because a politician is someone who applies ethics to the polis. How do you pronounce that? Polis. Police.
Polis. Την πόλη, ναι, polis.
Okay, so that's my
polis.
view. That's
Okay.
what you should do.
Can we have the microphone and people raising their hands to go there, and they stand? The camera will move to them. Okay. Isn't it very beautiful here? It is in the center, in the heart of Nicosia here. The sun is going down. It's the sunset. It's very romantic.
The weather is so nice also.
Hello, Professor Sachs. My name is Christoforos Michailidis. I am from the Russophile International Movement. I want to ask you a question.
A little bit away. Away.
I want to ask you...
Not so close to your mouth, a little there.
I want to ask you a question about Cyprus. What is more cost-effective in long term, Cyprus to join NATO or Cyprus to join BRICS?
Very interesting. Okay. So...
Interesting question.
I personally, well, first of all, let me just explain one thing. In 1991, if anyone had asked me, nobody did, but if anyone had asked me, I would have said, now it's time to end NATO. Why? Because NATO was established in the late 1940s to defend against an invasion of Europe by the Soviet Union. Now, I don't think such an invasion was going to come. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the Cold War in general. But be that as it may, in 1990, Mr. Gorbachev, who I advised on his economic team, and I regard as the greatest statesman of his era because he was a man of peace, which is incredible. He unilaterally disbanded the Warsaw Pact military alliance. He said it's over. I can tell you another interesting thing. I was the lead foreign advisor to post-communist Poland. And they made a merger of government in the middle of 1989 of the Solidarity anti-communist movement and the Communist Party President Jaruzelski. They made a merger. How did that merger come about? Gorbachev put it together. He told Jaruzelski, you should take those nice people from Solidarity, bring them into government. So we had the chance for peace. We had the chance for peace. The Soviet Union said, we don't want any more of this Cold War. We just want normal relations. What Gorbachev said is we want a common economic home from Rotterdam to Vladivostok. When Chancellor Kohl of Germany said in November 1990, now Germany can reunify. And that would end World War II, actually, in 1990, because there was no peace treaty after World War II. The United States and Germany said to Gorbachev, if you agree to German reunification, we will not take advantage of you. We will not move NATO 1 inch eastward. This isn't a myth, this isn't a story, this is a reality. And you can see Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the German foreign minister, on video saying exactly this and explaining it in February 1990. Okay, what happened? What happened is Germany reunified and the Soviet Union dissolved in December 1991. And Russia became what's called the successor state. It basically took over the UN seat and the treaties and the other obligations of the Soviet Union. What did the United States do? It immediately cheated, because my government cheats, because it's an imperial power. That's what empires do. So it immediately said, we start NATO expansion. And that wasn't made public until 1994, when Bill Clinton said NATO will enlarge eastward. But it was already in 1992 becoming part of the new U.S. doctrine. In 1994, it was decided. And they had the idea, by the way, NATO will expand all the way to Ukraine and to that great North Atlantic country called Georgia. Take a look at the map, ladies and gentlemen. Is Georgia a North Atlantic country? No, it is in the South Caucasus. The Caucasus are not on the North Atlantic. I'm sorry. Georgia has no business ever having been invited into NATO. But this is what empires do. Russia didn't like that, by the way, because Russia said, we don't want the United States and its missiles and its military and its CIA and everything else on our border. And you know what? They're right. And the United States does not want Russia on our border, whether it's Cuba in 1962 or Mexico or Canada and so on. Big powers should stay out of each other's way. This is the first principle for survival on our planet. Okay. So my view is NATO should not even exist any longer. That's my own view.
So we should not enter into NATO.
Don't enter what shouldn't exist. But, by the way, solve collective security issues.
Of Europe.
In the neighborhood. Talk with the neighbors. Many people say to me, by the way, okay, Mr. Sachs, you've explained why the Russians hate the NATO enlargement, and I've listened to Russia about this for a long time, and I happen to agree with the Russian position on this. But how do we know if we don't do X, Y, and Z that Russia won't then invade the Baltics and so forth? Whatever, okay? My first answer is ask them. Why are you asking me? Make some diplomacy. Discuss the issue. What kind of collective security can there be? But if you don't discuss it, this is where we started. How can you possibly know the answer to the question? The crazy thing is in the U.S., they think, we know how the Chinese think. We don't have to ask them. We know how the Russians think. They don't know anything. On my side, not my side, my country's government. They need to ask if they want to understand. You have to discuss. So, yeah, you don't need to join NATO right now for one thing. Second, in 10 years, I don't think NATO is going to exist. So don't get into big conniptions over something that's going to change anyway. But third, do figure out diplomacy.
They did ask about BRICS as well, but...
So, BRICS. What is BRICS? BRICS is a group of middle income, upper middle income, lower upper income countries that are saying we don't want to be bossed around by the United States. We don't like the unilateral sanctions. We don't like being told who to trade with, who not to trade with. We don't like suddenly waking up one day and having something called reciprocal tariffs that have nothing to do with reciprocal anything. Literally nothing to do with anything reciprocal. They don't like that. They don't like $300 billion of their reserves being frozen. I don't either. So BRICS started as a very loose group of so-called emerging economies. The term was invented by a Goldman Sachs banker in London, not as a geopolitical group, but as a description of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, just a description. But it became a group because the U.S. was bossing everybody around, imposing sanctions. You do this, you do that. We get to change Serbia's borders, but you don't get to change these borders. You do it our way. We're in charge, not you. And they got together to say, look, we want rules, but we don't want your rules. We want multilateral rules. Now, it happens that these countries are also fast-growing countries. That's one of the good things in the world today. Middle-income countries are growing faster than rich countries because they have more headroom to catch up, technological headroom, and they're catching up. So the fast-growing countries are China and India and Indonesia and so forth. So Europe should be trading with them. Whether it's members or not, you should have good, strong trade relations with China. You should have good relations with the BRICS. The BRICS are not an enemy group. They did form because the United States is too pushy, because it said we run the show. And so that's the origin of it. But the truth is, actually, we need some global rules of the road. What are those rules of the road? First, great powers should stay out of each other's neighborhoods. This is true. Second, great powers shouldn't lean on small countries and bully them and badger them. And there's no reason for that also, because small countries don't threaten the big countries. So the United States shouldn't be dictating to other countries or calling Canada the 51st state or saying we're going to take back Panama or we're going to invade Denmark in Greenland. This is not proper behavior at all. We shouldn't be doing any of that. Third, by the way, all foreign military bases should end, and they should go home everywhere in the world.
And from Cyprus, the British.
There's a longer list, but I'll stop there.
Yes, bring the mic to the next person. And while we bring the mic, I want to say that in a week from now, there is the Victory Day in Russia, and we are going with a group of members of the European Parliament, like 10 people. Also, our mutual friend Michael, we're going all there to show that not everyone from the European Union don't want to negotiate and engage in diplomacy.
Yeah, and by the way, can I say something about this? Because you're right, absolutely, to go. But look, the Soviet Union lost 27 million people defeating Hitler.
Half of the people died from
27 million people. The idea that Europe can't figure out to go and honor the dead and honor that achievement for humanity is terrible. Terrible. Because this is something for all of humanity, and it was a sacrifice that is indescribable, as people know. That's a fundamental point. A second point that I'd like to also say about this, to show the different way. In 1963, the only president that I've really liked in my lifetime, John F. Kennedy, gave a speech June 10, 1963, which I encourage you to look up. It's the commencement address at American University. I think it's the greatest foreign policy speech in modern history. And what it is a speech about making peace. Very unusual. And he gave it because the Cuban Missile Crisis a few months earlier had almost blown up the whole world. And he said, we need to do something different. And by the way, he knew he faced so much opposition inside his own government that he did not share the draft of the speech until the day before, because he didn't want the Defense Department or the State Department or the other security agencies to try to stop the speech. So he wrote it with his brilliant speechwriter, Ted Sorensen, who I was very fortunate to know and love and become friends with. And he gave the speech on June 10, 1963. The speech does not tell the Soviet Union to do anything. The whole speech is telling the American people, do you realize the other side are human beings that are like us, that want peace? The whole speech is to the American people, not to the Soviets. You do this, you do that, maximum sanctions if you don't do this. Not a word of that in the whole speech. It's to the Americans. We must rethink our own approach. We must realize peace is possible, that we are not gripped by forces we cannot control. He says the challenges of mankind were made by man and therefore they can be solved by man. But what he does in this speech is he has a section where he praises the Soviet Union for their valor, for their heroism, for the incredible loss that they suffered in World War II. Here's the leader of the United States praising the Soviet Union in 1963 at the top of the Cold War. What happened? The next day, Nikita Khrushchev got the speech, and he called the U.S. envoy in Moscow, Averell Harriman. And Averell Harriman came, and he said to Averell Harriman, the speech by your president is the finest speech by an American president since Franklin Roosevelt. I want to make peace with your president. 5 weeks later, they signed the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. It wasn't threats. It was giving dignity to the other side. And in 5 weeks, they reached an agreement that had eluded both sides for the previous decade. 5 weeks it took. Then, most likely, forces inside the U.S. government killed Kennedy for this. That's the grim truth. And that's another lie that has been kept secret. And the files that President Trump released recently add to the evidence that this was a government conspiracy, because it adds evidence that the CIA director of counterintelligence had a long, detailed file on none other than Lee Harvey Oswald in his office for years. And this wasn't some crazy loner that they just discovered. This was someone that was in some way part of the U.S. intelligence something. Now, that's hours more to discuss, but my view is they killed him. That's what happens to peacemakers often. But the fact of the matter is that the way you got the peace is you showed dignity to the other side. So Europe should get its act together and get to Moscow to praise what the Soviet Union and the Russian people did in the Second World War to defeat fascism. And thank you for going.
The microphone. Who is talking? Well, oh, yeah, speak. The camera on here, is it? Okay, good. You have a question, but we need sound also.
Hi.
Woohoo!
I had a question to go back to the security discussion before the Cold War thing. Regarding Cyprus specifically, how can, and regarding the British that you talked about before, how can the Cyprus question slowly turn into getting rid of the British bases in Cyprus?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Look, I don't know if it's possible right now. The United States, by the way, has 750 overseas military bases in 80 countries. My God. What are we doing? And the hundreds of billions of dollars wasted on this. But the damage that this causes, because any place hosting military bases of the United States, you don't sleep too well at night, frankly, because they create trouble, or they're used for wars. They're used for wars in your neighborhood also, these bases and so forth. So we're far from what I'm saying, but I think it's the right principle. The right principle is first to recognize we don't need these bases. This is not giving the world security. It's not giving Cyprus security. It's not giving the world security. it's creating all of these confrontations of major powers that could blow up the whole world. I hope that the United States can somehow begin to understand this. Maybe Donald Trump will. When Donald Trump says, I don't know about NATO, he's on the right track, actually. That's not against Europe, that's for Europe, by the way. NATO, U.S. and Europe is not helping Europe. You may think it is, but diplomacy with Russia would be a lot more secure than what you have right now. What we have right now is we came close to a nuclear war in the fall of 2022. By close, I mean perhaps 25% or 30%. That's the inside estimates of the U.S. government, reportedly. This is insane, insane to be anywhere above tiny, tiny, tiny fractions of 1%. This is the end of the world stuff. So all of this way that we talk about security now does not make sense. And I was just reading, the endless stream of things. American Enterprise Institute. It's a right-wing or whatever, center-right, but in America that means pretty right-wing institute, and it's how is America going to win the Cold War against China? And I looked at this and I said, this is so nuts. What is this Cold War? We don't even have a Cold War. Why do we have a Cold War? What are we supposed to win against China? This is crazy, but it's so deep in the mindset that everything's against somebody else. It's not even true. China's just trying to have its development right now. It's not trying to do anything else, and China's not about to invade the United States. This is nuts. So there is no Cold War, but it's taken for granted. It doesn't say, is there a Cold War? Should there be a Cold War? Will there be a Cold War? It's how to win the Cold War. So this is why we have military bases all over the place, because we're not run by sensible people. We're run by a security apparatus that is not sensible. And it's not about security, it's about power. Enough of the power. We need security. Security comes from talking to each other, not from military bases.
So we should try to remove the military places, or is dangerous to remove them because we are going to go against that strong?
I would politely invite them to leave.
Yes, this guy is so passionate and a bit old, so we want him. And the microphone to him.
Thank you very much, Professor, for such an insightful, valuable information you shared with us.
Thank you.
On your suggestion that we must find a win-win situation with Turkey, I very much agree. There is no bad peace. In the same way, there is no good war. We have to find a way. On the other hand, to put you in the picture, when we first had the visitation of the Ottoman Turks in 1570, they did not come to us like you did for us to give them hospitality. Neither did they come as refugees, persecuted refugees, for us to give them asylum and help. They came to kill, smash, and take. And in just 3 days, when they scaled the walls of Nicosia near here, they killed 20,000 people and took away 10,000 as slaves. And they came to repeat the same thing in 1974. And now they threaten us to do much worse things to us if we don't succumb to the horrendous demands. So can you please tell us, under what conditions and circumstances can we find a win-win situation with the Turks from Turkey? Yeah. With the Turkish Cypriots, there is no problem. We have a similar genetic makeup, and many of them are ex-Christians forced into Islam. We can find a way with them. But what about the Turks from Turkey?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I don't know the answer to that question, of course, but it's a question that is a good question to ask to the Turkish. It's a good question to ask to the Turkish government.
It's fun. Athlete is fun.
What am I doing? Sorry. Okay. I don't know the answer to the question, but it is a good question to ask of the Turkish government, which is not the Ottoman Empire, it's the Republic of Turkey. And I'm going to ask it because I meet with Turkish diplomats, because I'm friendly with the Turkish leadership, and I'm going to ask. And I'm going to do my best to understand better what the Turkish point of view is on this, and to see whether there isn't a way forward. Because I would say very strongly to my Turkish counterparts that they would be better off with a resolution of this crisis. So that's what I'm going to say. And I'm going to try to find out myself, because I've never been involved in this issue at all. But I'm going to try to understand. I work at the UN. I discuss with diplomats from all over the world. I don't believe in the cancel culture at all, which is I don't accept when people tell me, you can't talk to this one, you can't travel to that one, you can't go to this one. I regard all of that as profoundly wrong-headed. And so my view is always talk, always learn, try to understand the perspective of the other side. Not everything can be solved, but I believe in most cases that most people want solutions that are mutually beneficial. Then, as I explained already or said, because you know it, it can be the case that there can be a true win-win that's for almost everybody, but it's blocked by the political elite or some other reason, but not a general reason. Even in those cases, you might be able to say to a politician, this is really better for you too, even though you may not think about it, but it really is better for you as well. So in any event, I'm going to try to get your question asked.
I will ask you about the answer that you got, by the way, remember.
And I also believe this is also a little complicated, but Turkey is not the Ottoman Empire. Germany today is not Hitler's Germany. If you always say, we remember X, it's possible on that basis that one can lose sight of the present and the future. And this is really important. We shouldn't be trapped by history. We should try to understand history, but we shouldn't be trapped by history. There's the famous expression of George Santayana that those who can't remember history are condemned to repeat it. And my wife's proposition is those who can't forget history are condemned to repeat it. So my wife often says, fresh start. Just get on with it. Be practical. But I don't think we can completely, and she knows you can't completely forget, but you cannot be a prisoner of the past. And so we really need to understand that in our times, what can we do? And incidentally, Immanuel Kant, the great German philosopher, wrote in 1795 a brilliant, wonderful, important paper called Perpetual Peace. And he asked the question, how could you establish peace perpetually? And he made many, many brilliant ideas, including the kind of mental formation of what a United Nations someday should be. But there is no such thing as perpetual peace. There is no such thing as perfect security. There is no such thing as a perfect answer to any situation. There is no such thing as a complete victory. None of this in our world exists. That's for another world. But for our world, everything is a bit imperfect, and everything we do has to be, in a sense, about us in our time and thinking about our children and our grandchildren. And it can't be, we need the answer that's perfect forever, because we'll never find that. And so that's why I'm always looking also for, isn't there some practical answer that's going to be better? And that's usually why I think if we stick at the pragmatic level, it's not perfect, it's not entirely fair, it doesn't answer every issue, but it's not bad, and it's better for both sides. Okay, maybe we can do that.
Okay. We have another question, and then I will ask the last question and we end it. There is, some water. You want some water? Yes, he wants.
Thank you.
He gave it to him, so can we have some water? Yeah. Okay, ask the question. We apologize for the rest, guys. We love you.
Hello, Professor. It's nice to see you in person. I have two questions. Do you think the 3% fiscal deficit limit from the Maastricht Treaty is still justified today? And what's your view on a centralized euro budget funded by Eurobonds and backed by the European Central Bank? And what do you think of Keynes' Bancor proposal? And could it be a valid alternative to the current dollar-based international trade system?
Okay, I didn't catch the first exactly.
I didn't
The first
either.
one was about the 3% fiscal deficit limit from the Maastricht Treaty.
Oh.
And if it can be replaced, and what's your view on a centralized euro budget funded by Eurobonds and backed by the central bank?
A centralized...
You
You can answer only the second.
You
Okay,
can
we
answer
said
the
one.
second one only, it's fine.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm not sure I caught everything, and I'm not sure I even know exactly some of the current debate. But let me say a couple of things about fiscal policy. In general, don't run up debt too high. It's a real thing. And the United States has a budget deficit of 7% of GDP right now, and it's a mess. And it's not good to be trapped in that. I'm not so impressed with this idea of $800 billion of arms build-up. Again, I wouldn't do anything on arms build-up without diplomacy taking the front position first. On fiscal rules, rules are not bad. Sometimes they have to be broken in extremis or in a crisis. So the 3% fiscal rule, it's got its arguments. The truth is the following, though, for Europe. Europe is a quite heavily taxed economy in general, European-wide. It's between 40 and 50% of GDP. In France, above 50% of GDP. The United States is 30% of GDP. We're too low in taxation, actually, because we don't even provide health care for everybody. It's disgusting, actually. But Europe doesn't have room for more and more taxes. It really doesn't. It's a heavily taxed economy. So in this sense, I don't love the idea of Europe just spending more. I tend to be progressive in income distribution and in public investments and in education outlays and so forth. And I think Europe does a good job of that, by the way. I think it does the best job in the whole world. This part of the world is the fairest economy in the world. It's got the lowest inequality in the world. It's got the highest coverage of social services in the whole world. It's got, in my view, the best quality of life in the whole world.
Wow.
It's got the highest life expectancy.
I was not expecting this answer.
It's got the highest life expectancy in the whole world, several years longer than the United States, for example, which is a much less fair society. But you don't have all that much room for maneuver because you're already at pretty heavy tax loads. And I wouldn't add much more debt on top of this, and I don't think there's any freebie that Europe has that it can pile on new spending. And I don't love, I really don't like, we got to build the military like crazy. By the way, one thing, please, 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 do not spend more to buy arms from the United States. Okay? They're arms dealers, my government. That's one of their major jobs, is to just sell overpriced weapon systems. That's one of the key jobs. If you're going to have an armaments industry, and you should have one at some scale, do it yourself. You get technological spin-off from that. It also spins off to the civilian economy. Almost everything in the digital economy in the United States, the semiconductor systems, the internet, it all started with the military, by the way. All of it. All of the microchips of the 1960s was NASA and the space program. So that is a spillover into the civilian economy. So just don't do it to please Donald Trump to buy his armaments. That for sure is not a great way to spend your money. And don't go overboard. Put diplomacy first. You'll find out it's really inexpensive, and it saves a lot of grief. I think you were asking me about the monetary system also. Oh, so just an interesting point. The dollar is the preeminent currency in the world for about 60% of global transactions. For transactions within Europe, the euro is. So you don't use the dollar for intra-European transactions by and large. But for Europe to the rest of the world or other countries, the dollar still remains the main currency. Just as a quick reality check, I think this will change markedly in the next 10 years with a much smaller role of the dollar, a much larger role of the renminbi, and a larger role for other currencies as well. And there are three basic reasons for that very quickly. One is the U.S. economy is becoming a smaller share of the world economy as other countries grow faster. That's number one. Second, the United States has an obnoxious habit that Europe has fallen into as well, and that is grabbing other people's money. If you want people to use the dollar, don't take their dollars away. This freezing of the Russian balances is absolutely illegal and counterproductive because, believe me, it tells the Russians, don't use dollars. Duh. So this will absolutely speed the shift to other currencies. And the third reason is we're entering a digital currency age where you don't need an antiquated system like the SWIFT clearing system to make settlements. We're going to have digital central bank currencies. We're going to have other settlements that are much more efficient. So my view is the dollar will play a much smaller role in 10 years. When it comes to this question, should Europe confiscate the 300 billion in Euroclear in Belgium in order to finance a continuation of the war in Ukraine? The answer is no. It's a terrible idea for two reasons. One, the war in Ukraine should stop. It shouldn't go on. And second, if you confiscate the money, this will destroy credibility of the European financial markets. So don't steal other people's money. Don't freeze other people's money. This is just really basic stuff.
And now, as we come closer to the end, I want to ask you, how did you find your time here in this event?
This is a great way to spend an afternoon. So I suggest we come back tomorrow at the same time and continue our conversation. And with this guy, it's likely to happen, by the way. Give him a big hand.
So we discussed together before that we are going to do another event in the European Parliament around October, something like this, November. I will ask you what's the news. You spoke to the the Turkish officials, and what did you hear back? So, and I will inform them. Don't worry, we hold you accountable.
That sounds good.
Because there is cameras here recording as well, if you don't forget. And we want to say a big thank you, but before we have food here, guys. And because Jeffrey is traveling all over the world and is very used to this event, he did all these hundreds, maybe thousands of times. We don't want to spend too much of his time here. He's not going to take too many selfies, but in return we have food and drinks and all this stuff. So we are going to allow him to go and spend a very beautiful sunset time with his wife while they are leaving. And I want to say, guys, there is all these people here. There is a lot of intellectual, probably, individuals that they hear him and all this stuff. So it's a good opportunity for you over drinks to speak with each other and network and all this stuff and enjoy this beautiful life that we are living on. Thank you.
Amazing.